Did you ever wonder how the baby products your parents trusted could end up being illegal now? In the 1970s, these items filled nurseries with promises of safety, comfort, and modern convenience. So what hidden dangers were quietly waiting inside your crib? Hard plastic baby bottles containing BPA were everywhere in the 1970s, stacked in kitchen cabinets and tucked into diaper bags like tiny symbols of modern parenting. Parents loved how sturdy they felt, how easily they washed, and how they never shattered the way older glass bottles had done for generations. Nobody imagined that the strong plastic holding their baby's nourishment could be quietly releasing something harmful with every warm feeding. The chemical bisphenol A slowly leached into liquids, especially when bottles were heated in boiling water or left sitting in sunlight. Parents sterilized these bottles daily, believing they were doing the safest thing possible, completely unaware that the very process meant to protect their babies was increasing the danger. Researchers later discovered that even tiny traces of BPA could disrupt hormones in infants, affecting development in ways nobody had ever predicted. When the findings became public, the shock rippled through households that had trusted these bottles without question. Regulators moved quickly, banning BPA from baby bottles and forcing manufacturers to redesign products that had seemed so harmless. Dropside cribs with unstable latches were considered a blessing for parents in the 1970s, offering a clever design that made lifting babies in and out much easier on tired backs. The side panel slid down smoothly, allowing parents to reach their little ones without straining over a fixed rail. Nurseries across the country were filled with these cribs, often passed down through siblings because they seemed so practical. Nobody questioned the latches that held the movable side in place, trusting that something sold for babies must have been tested beyond doubt. But the latches were not as reliable as families believed. Over time, the hardware loosened, panels shifted, and gaps appeared between the mattress and the side rail. Babies rolled into those gaps, became trapped, and some never woke up. The tragedies mounted quietly at first, scattered across different towns before anyone connected them to a single design flaw. When investigators traced the pattern, the findings were devastating. Regulators banned dropside cribs entirely, forcing families to discard furniture they had trusted with their children's lives. It remains a heartbreaking reminder that convenience should never come before safety. Baby walkers without safety brakes were among the most popular baby products in the 1970s, promising parents that their little ones could explore while learning to take their first steps. These wheeled contraptions looked cheerful and exciting, with colorful trays and seats that let babies bounce and roll across kitchen floors. Parents loved how independent their children seemed, scooting from room to room with big smiles and wobbly legs. Nobody imagined that the freedom these walkers offered could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. Without brakes or speed controls, babies gained momentum faster than anyone expected, rolling toward staircases and hot stoves before parents could react. Emergency rooms reported a steady stream of injuries, from broken bones to head trauma, all tied to babies tumbling downstairs or crashing into furniture. Some accidents were far worse, leaving families devastated by outcomes no one saw coming. Investigators eventually documented enough cases to push for strict regulations, and walkers without proper safety features were banned. The cheerful contraptions that once symbolized independence became cautionary tales about how quickly joy can turn into tragedy. Lead-painted nursery furniture filled baby rooms across the 1970s with bright yellows, cheerful blues, and soft pinks that made every crib and changing table look like something out of a storybook. Parents carefully selected these pieces, believing the vivid colors would stimulate their babies and create a warm, welcoming space for their newest family member. What nobody realized was that lead hid inside those beautiful colors, waiting to flake off into tiny chips that curious babies would find and place directly into their mouths. Lead poisoning does not announce itself loudly. It builds silently, damaging developing brains and nervous systems in ways that might not appear for years. Children chewed on crib rails during teething, rubbed their fingers along painted edges, and inhaled dust particles that settled on sheets and blankets. By the time researchers connected lead exposure to developmental delays, countless families had already unknowingly harmed the children they were trying so hard to protect. Regulators banned lead paint for consumer products, but the legacy of those cheerful nurseries lingers as a painful reminder of how danger can hide behind the brightest colors. Crib bumper pads with thick cushioning were considered essential nursery items in the 1970s. Soft barriers that parents wrapped around cribs to protect tiny heads from hard wooden slats. The padding looked cozy and reassuring, turning a bare crib into something that felt safer and more comfortable for a sleeping infant. Parents tucked these bumpers tightly against the rails, believing they were shielding their babies from bruises and drafts. Advertisements showed peaceful nurseries with plump, quilted bumpers framing sleeping babies like protective clouds. What nobody discussed was how easily an infant could roll against that soft padding and find their face pressed into fabric with nowhere for air to flow. Babies lack the strength to push away or turn their heads when breathing becomes difficult, and the softness that seemed so comforting became a suffocation risk parents never imagined. Tragedy after tragedy accumulated before safety experts connected the pattern. Studies revealed that crib bumpers contributed to infant deaths at alarming rates. Regulators eventually banned the sale of thick crib bumpers, leaving parents to reconsider everything they thought they knew about making a nursery safe. Loose-fitting crib sheets were a quiet hazard that nobody in the 1970s thought to question, because fitted sheets for baby mattresses simply did not fit the way modern parents expect. Mothers tucked corners under as best they could, smoothing fabric across mattresses that never quite matched the dimensions printed on packaging. The sheets bunched, shifted, and pulled free during the night, creating folds and pockets of loose material inside the crib. Parents checked on their babies and saw rumpled fabric, assuming it was nothing more than evidence of restless sleep. But loose sheets can wrap around tiny faces, cover mouths and noses, and create barriers to breathing that infants cannot escape on their own. The danger was invisible to exhausted parents who trusted that a simple piece of fabric could not possibly cause harm. Suffocation incidents mounted over the years, and investigators traced deaths back to bedding that had come undone. Safety standards eventually required fitted sheets to grip mattresses securely, with elastic strong enough to stay in place. Families remember tucking those sheets repeatedly, never realizing how close they came to tragedy with every corner that slipped free. Baby powder with pure talc was one of the most trusted items in any 1970s nursery, a soft white cloud that parents dusted onto babies after every diaper change. The powder smelled clean and fresh, absorbing moisture and leaving skin feeling silky smooth in a way that seemed like the definition of good baby care. Mothers shook it generously, creating little puffs that floated through the air and settled onto changing tables and floors. Nobody questioned the ritual because it had been passed down through generations, a symbol of tenderness and attention to comfort. But talc carried risks that families never imagined. The fine particles drifted into tiny lungs with every breath, and some talc deposits were later found to be contaminated with asbestos, a known carcinogen that clings to tissue and never lets go. Babies inhaled powder meant to soothe them, and parents had no idea they were introducing a danger that could linger for a lifetime. When researchers connected talc exposure to respiratory problems and potential cancer risks, the backlash was swift. Regulators restricted talc in baby products, and manufacturers scrambled to reformulate powders that families had trusted for decades. Mercury thermometers for infants were standard equipment in every medicine cabinet during the 1970s, slender glass tubes that parents slipped under tiny arms or held gently in small mouths to check for fevers. The silver line inside rose and fell with reassuring precision, giving families a number they could trust when deciding whether to call the doctor. These thermometers felt reliable and essential for any parent trying to care for a sick child. Nobody thought twice about the liquid metal sealed inside the glass, because mercury was simply part of how thermometers worked. But glass breaks easily, especially in the hands of restless, feverish children who squirm and cry. When a thermometer shattered, tiny silver beads of mercury rolled across counters, sank into carpet fibers, and evaporated into air that families continued to breathe. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin, and even small exposures can harm developing brains in ways that might not appear for years. Regulators eventually banned mercury thermometers for home use, replacing them with digital alternatives that carried no hidden risks. It is unsettling to realize how casually families once placed poison inches from their babies. Vintage baby formula with unsafe additives seemed like a miracle of modern science in the 1970s, offering busy mothers an alternative to breastfeeding that promised complete nutrition in a convenient powder or liquid. Parents trusted the labels and the pediatricians who recommended specific brands without hesitation. Formula feeding became normalized as families embraced products that fit into faster-paced lifestyles. What most parents did not know was that early formulas contained ingredients that would never pass modern safety standards. Some formulations included sweeteners, preservatives, and stabilizers that researchers later linked to health concerns ranging from allergies to developmental issues. Regulations governing baby food were far less strict, and companies assumed that ingredients safe for adults must be safe for infants. Babies consume these formulas daily, absorbing whatever chemicals manufacturers chose to include. When stricter food safety laws arrived, many additives were quietly removed or banned outright, leaving parents who had trusted those formulas feeling betrayed. It is troubling to realize that feeding a baby once carried hidden risks nobody understood until science caught up. Soft-sided infant sleep positioners were marketed heavily in the 1970s as the answer to every parent's deepest fear, promising to keep babies safely on their backs and reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. These foam wedges and bolsters looked reassuring, creating a cozy nest that seemed to hold infants securely in place throughout the night. Parents placed their babies between the padded sides, believing they were adding an extra layer of protection to an already safe crib. The products came with confident claims and peaceful images of sleeping infants, but the soft materials that made these positioners seem so comfortable were exactly what made them dangerous. Babies who rolled against the foam found their faces pressed into surfaces that blocked airflow, and the wedges designed to keep them still became traps they could not escape. Suffocation deaths linked to sleep positioners accumulated over the years, and investigators eventually traced a devastating pattern back to products that had promised safety above all else. Regulators issued warnings and banned sleep positioners entirely, leaving families to grapple with the truth that devices meant to protect their babies had done the opposite. Small parts baby rattles were among the most beloved toys in any 1970s nursery, colorful shapes that jingled and clattered when tiny hands shook them with delight. Parents gave them to infants without hesitation, watching their babies grip the handles and wave them back and forth with growing coordination. The rattles came in every color and design imaginable, some shaped like animals, others like flowers or simple rings. What made them dangerous was the way they were assembled. Small beads, bells, and decorative pieces were attached with glue or weak plastic joints that loosened over time. Babies explored everything with their mouths, and when a piece broke free, it became a choking hazard that could block an airway in seconds. Emergency rooms saw case after case of infants gasping for breath, and doctors traced the incidents back to rattles that had fallen apart during normal play. Regulators eventually required strict testing for small parts, banning any toy that could release pieces small enough to fit through a testing tube designed to mimic a child's throat. The cheerful rattles that once filled cribs with happy sounds became symbols of how easily joy can turn to tragedy. Lead crystal baby cups and dishes were treasured gifts in the 1970s, often presented at baby showers or christenings as elegant keepsakes meant to last a lifetime. These sparkling pieces caught the light beautifully, turning feeding time into something that felt refined and special. Parents displayed them proudly on nursery shelves or used them for milestone moments like first sips of juice. Nobody imagined that the very sparkle that made these dishes so appealing came from lead woven into the crystal itself. When acidic liquids like fruit juice or milk sat in these cups, the lead slowly leached into whatever the baby was drinking. Infants consumed tiny doses with every sip, and the metal accumulated in their bodies over time. Lead poisoning in children causes developmental delays, behavioral problems, and damage that can last a lifetime. When researchers finally connected the danger to these beautiful dishes, the findings were devastating. Regulators banned lead crystal from anything intended for children, and families were urged to pack away keepsakes they had cherished for years. Those elegant cups now sit in storage boxes, reminders that beauty and danger sometimes share the same shine. PVC teething rings softened with phthalates were a staple in every 1970s diaper bag, squishy toys that babies chewed on for hours while their first teeth pushed through swollen gums. Parents loved how soft and flexible these rings felt, believing the gentle material was perfectly designed for tender mouths. The bright colors and playful shapes made them irresistible to infants who grabbed them and immediately began gnawing. What nobody understood was that the chemicals making the plastic so soft were slowly migrating into every bite. Phthalates, used to make rigid PVC pliable, leached out whenever the rings were chewed or warmed. Babies absorbed these chemicals through their mouths daily, and researchers later discovered that phthalates could disrupt the endocrine system, affecting hormones that guide development. The revelation shocked parents who had trusted these teething rings without question. Regulators moved to ban phthalates from children's products, forcing manufacturers to reformulate toys that seemed harmless. Those soft, colorful rings that once soothed crying babies became cautionary reminders that chemicals inside everyday products can carry consequences nobody sees until science catches up. Weighted baby blankets were marketed in the 1970s as soothing solutions for fussy infants who struggled to settle at night. The extra heft was supposed to mimic the comfort of being held, calming babies into deeper sleep with gentle pressure spread across their tiny bodies. Parents, desperate for rest, embraced these blankets eagerly, draping them over cribs with hope that peaceful nights would finally arrive. The blankets felt substantial and reassuring, like a warm hug that lasted through the darkness. What nobody considered was how dangerous that extra weight could become. Infants lack the strength to push heavy fabric away from their faces, and blankets that shift during sleep can cover mouths and noses without warning. The pressure meant to soothe could also restrict breathing or cause overheating in babies whose bodies cannot regulate temperature well. Reports of suffocation and heat-related incidents accumulated before safety experts connected the pattern. Regulators eventually restricted weighted blankets for infants, warning parents that comfort came with risks too serious to ignore. Those heavy blankets now carry labels that would have shocked families who believed they were helping babies sleep. Rear-facing infant seats without proper harnesses were considered modern marvels in the 1970s, giving parents a way to transport babies in cars without simply holding them on laps. These early car seats looked sturdy and official, with hard plastic shells and basic straps that seemed far better than nothing at all. Families installed them proudly, believing they were providing the best protection available for their most precious passengers. What nobody realized was how inadequate those early designs truly were. The harnesses were often too loose, poorly positioned, or too easily unbuckled by squirming babies who did not understand the danger. In crashes, infants slipped free or were thrown against the seats meant to protect them. The impact forces that adults survived with bruises proved devastating to babies whose bodies were far more fragile. Investigations revealed a heartbreaking pattern of injuries that better harness systems could have prevented. Regulators eventually mandated stricter standards, requiring 5-point harnesses, proper recline angles, and rigorous crash testing. The car seats that once represented progress became symbols of how much further safety engineering still needed to go. Baby swings without restraint straps were popular fixtures in 1970s homes, offering parents a hands-free way to soothe fussy infants with gentle rocking motion. These swings hung from door frames or stood on metal legs, swaying back and forth while babies cooed or drifted off to sleep. Parents loved the freedom these devices provided, allowing them to cook dinner or fold laundry while their little ones stayed entertained. The seats looked secure enough, with high backs and padded sides that seemed to cradle babies safely in place. What nobody anticipated was how quickly infants could shift their weight, lean too far, or simply slide downward out of seats that had no straps to hold them. babies tumbled onto hard floors, struck their heads on swing frames, or became tangled in ways that left them hanging dangerously. Emergency rooms documented injuries ranging from bruises to serious head trauma, all tied to swings that lacked basic restraints. Regulators eventually required safety straps on all infant swings, transforming a product that had once seemed harmless into one that met strict modern standards. Those early swings remind us that even gentle motion can turn dangerous without proper safeguards. Tris-treated flame-retardant sleepwear was marketed to parents in the 1970s as the safest choice for children who might encounter open flames, space heaters, or kitchen stoves while wearing their pajamas. The chemical treatment promised to prevent fabric from catching fire, and parents embraced these garments as responsible protection for their little ones. Stores stocked entire racks of treated sleepwear, and families bought them without hesitation because anything labeled flame retardant seemed wise. What nobody knew was that Tris, the chemical soaked into every fiber, carried dangers far worse than the fires it was meant to prevent. The compound absorbed through skin during sleep, entered the bloodstream, and accumulated in bodies night after night. Researchers later discovered that Tris was a probable carcinogen, capable of causing damage that might not appear for years. When the findings became public, the outcry was immediate. Regulators banned Tris-treated sleepwear and forced massive recalls of products already in homes. Parents who had dressed their children in these pajamas for months were left with the unsettling realization that protection and poison had been woven into the same fabric all along. Baby aspirin given freely for fevers was standard medical advice throughout the 1970s, a trusted remedy that parents reached for whenever their infants felt warm to the touch. Doctors recommended it, pharmacists sold it without concern, and medicine cabinets kept small bottles within easy reach. The tiny tablets seemed perfectly safe, specially formulated for little bodies that needed relief from childhood illnesses. Parents crushed them into applesauce or dissolved them in juice, confident they were helping their babies feel better. What nobody understood was the connection between aspirin and a rare but devastating condition called Reye syndrome, which attacked the liver and brain of children recovering from viral infections. The link remained hidden while cases accumulated in hospitals, baffling doctors who could not explain why children deteriorated after routine illnesses. When researchers finally connected aspirin to the syndrome, the warnings spread rapidly. Regulators restricted aspirin for children under certain ages, and parents were urged to use alternative fever reducers. The tablets that once seemed harmless became reminders that even familiar medicines can carry risks nobody anticipates. Crib mobiles with long dangling strings were beloved decorations in 1970s nurseries, spinning slowly above sleeping babies with colorful shapes that caught the light and captured infant attention. Parents hung them carefully from crib rails or ceiling hooks, believing the gentle movement would soothe their little ones and stimulate developing minds. The mobiles came in every theme imaginable, from circus animals to planets and stars, each trailing ribbons or cords that added movement and visual interest. Nobody imagined that those dangling decorations could become deadly the moment a baby grew strong enough to reach upward. Infants who grabbed the strings could pull them down, wrap them around necks, or become tangled in ways that cut off breathing before anyone noticed. Strangulation deaths linked to crib mobiles accumulated quietly before safety experts issued urgent warnings. Regulators eventually required that mobiles be removed as soon as babies could push up on hands and knees, and manufacturers redesigned products with shorter, breakaway strings. The cheerful decorations that once defined nursery charm became cautionary symbols of how quickly innocent beauty can turn dangerous. Mesh-sided playpens with loose netting were considered essential baby gear in the 1970s, portable enclosures that gave parents peace of mind while keeping curious crawlers safely contained. These playpens folded flat for travel and popped open wherever families needed them, creating instant safe zones in living rooms and backyards. The mesh sides seemed like smart design choices, allowing airflow and visibility while keeping babies securely inside. Parents trusted these playpens completely, setting infants down for naps or play without worrying. What nobody realized was how dangerous the mesh could become when it loosened or sagged. Babies who rolled against drooping netting could slip into pockets of fabric that pressed against their faces, blocking airways without visible sign of distress. Some playpens had rails that collapsed unexpectedly, creating gaps where tiny heads became trapped. Deaths and injuries accumulated before investigators connected the pattern to design flaws. Regulators issued strict new standards requiring tighter mesh, sturdier frames, and hardware that could not collapse. Those convenient playpens became symbols of how trusted products can fail in ways nobody imagines. Door frame. Baby jumpers without safety standards were wildly popular in the 1970s, bouncing contraptions that clamped onto doorways and let babies spring up and down with abandon. Parents loved watching infants giggle, believing the exercise strengthened little legs. The jumpers attached with simple clamps that hooked over door frames, requiring no tools. Nobody questioned whether those attachment points could hold. What families did not realize was how easily these jumpers could fail. Clamps slipped, straps loosened, and the apparatus sometimes detached without warning, sending babies crashing to floors. Some infants struck their heads on door frames, while others became tangled in straps. Emergency rooms documented injuries from bruises to serious head trauma. Regulators eventually required stricter testing for attachment strength and harness design. The bouncing seats that once filled doorways with laughter became reminders that baby products need proper engineering. Infant bath seats with suction cups seemed like brilliant inventions in the 1970s, plastic rings that suctioned to the tub and held babies upright during bath time. Parents loved the freedom these seats provided, allowing them to reach for soap without gripping a slippery infant. The suction cups appeared sturdy enough to give exhausted parents relief. What nobody anticipated was how easily those cups could release. Soapy water, textured surfaces, and wiggling babies all conspired to break the seal. When the suction failed, babies tipped face first into water before parents could react. Drowning happens in seconds, and shallow bath water poses deadly risks to infants who cannot right themselves. Tragedies accumulated before investigators connected the deaths to these products. Regulators banned the most dangerous designs and required warnings that seats never replace supervision. The plastic rings that promised convenience became symbols of how quickly water turns deadly. Metal high chairs without restraints were sturdy fixtures in 1970s kitchens, heavy chrome frames with vinyl seats that looked built to last. Parents trusted these chairs completely, believing the weight made them safe without straps. Babies sat at family tables for the first time, learning to eat solid foods while perched high above the floor. The chairs seemed indestructible, passed down through siblings. What nobody considered was how active babies become once they discover they can move. Infants climbed, squirmed, and twisted in ways that sent them tumbling over armrests or sliding beneath trays. Falls from high chairs onto hard floors caused fractures, concussions, and injuries requiring emergency care. Some babies became trapped in gaps between seat and tray. Regulators eventually mandated restraint systems, requiring straps that kept babies secured. Those heavy chrome chairs still sit in basements, relics of an era that trusted construction over caution. Unshielded nursery space heaters were common in 1970s homes where central heating could not keep every room warm enough for a sleeping baby. Parents placed these electric heaters near cribs, believing the warmth would keep infants comfortable through cold nights. The glowing coils cast a soft orange light that seemed cozy. What nobody considered was how dangerous those exposed elements truly were. Curious babies who reached through crib bars could touch surfaces hot enough to cause burns. Blankets that fell from cribs landed on heaters and ignited within minutes. Cords became tripping hazards that pulled heaters onto carpets where fires started. Investigations revealed a pattern of tragedies tied to unshielded heaters placed near flammable materials. Regulators eventually required protective guards, automatic shutoffs, and tip-over switches. The glowing coils that once seemed comforting became warnings about how easily warmth can turn into disaster. Asbestos-lined baby products were sold throughout the 1970s as premium items offering superior fire resistance. Manufacturers wove asbestos fibers into mattress covers, changing table pads, and car seat covers. Parents paid extra, believing they were investing in the safest options. The word asbestos carried no fear back then. It simply meant fireproof. What nobody understood was that asbestos fibers, once disturbed, float invisibly through air and lodge permanently in lung tissue. Babies sleeping on asbestos mattresses breathed in fibers that would remain in their bodies for life. Parents who washed these products released microscopic particles into nursery air. Decades later, researchers connected asbestos exposure to cancers and lung diseases. Regulators banned asbestos from consumer products, but the damage was already woven into countless families. Those fire-resistant promises became tragic reminders that the most dangerous threats are often invisible. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section. Small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, the kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. Bleached flour with benzoyl peroxide was sold as the purest, whitest flour money could buy. Housewives loved it. It looked clean, modern, and scientifically improved. The bleaching process made the flour snow white, a symbol of quality and refinement in mid-century kitchens. In an age obsessed with hygiene and purity, white meant progress, and the food industry knew it. Magazines ran full-page ads showing spotless kitchens and immaculate loaves, as if color itself could signal contamination. The reality was far less pristine. Each bag carried traces of industrial chemicals that no one could pronounce. But the same chemical used to bleach the flour was also used in industrial processes, including plastics and cleaning agents. Over time, scientists found that benzoyl peroxide left behind chemical residues that affected digestion and possibly the nervous system. The flour looked perfect but carried unseen consequences. Bakers noticed something too. The bread made with it tasted flat, lifeless, and oddly sterile. By the time regulators banned the practice, America had learned another hard truth. Food does not need to look perfect to be good. Natural color, once seen as old-fashioned, became a mark of authenticity. The ghost white loaves of the 1950s gave way to the golden brown of something real again. Lead acetate hair dyes were the quiet miracle of the 1970s for anyone desperate to cover gray without the harsh look of traditional dyes. These products worked gradually, darkening hair over several applications until the silver strands disappeared into rich, natural-looking color. People loved the subtlety, the way the transformation happened so slowly that nobody could pinpoint exactly when the gray vanished. The creams and liquids were applied with bare hands, massaged into roots, and left to work their magic while families went about their daily routines. What nobody realized was that lead acetate absorbed directly through the scalp with every single application. Lead does not flush out of the body easily. It builds up in bones, blood, and organs, causing damage that often goes unnoticed until symptoms become severe. Children who hugged parents with freshly treated hair absorbed lead residue without anyone suspecting danger. When scientists finally proved the connection between these dyes and lead poisoning, the products were pulled from shelves immediately. The promise of youthful hair had come with a cost nobody ever imagined. Chlordane foundation treatment was sprayed around the perimeters of homes throughout the 1970s as the ultimate defense against termites. Pest control companies promised long-lasting protection, and homeowners gladly paid to keep their wooden structures safe from insects that could hollow out a house from inside. The chemicals soaked into soil, seeped into basement walls, and created a barrier meant to last for decades. And it did last, but not the way anyone expected. Chlordane never broke down. It lingered in the ground, drifted into basements as vapor, and contaminated air inside homes for years after application. Families breathed it without knowing, and researchers linked the chemical to liver damage, neurological problems, and cancer. Some homes became so contaminated they were declared uninhabitable, their foundations permanently poisoned. When regulators banned Chlordane, the announcement came with grim recognition that cleanup was nearly impossible. Families who thought they were protecting their homes discovered they had invited a chemical guest that refused to leave. The soil around their foundations remained toxic long after anyone remembered the original treatment. Sizzlean was supposed to be the future of breakfast. Marketed in the 1970s as better than bacon, it promised the same smoky flavor with less fat and cholesterol. Commercials showed smiling families flipping perfect strips on the stove, proud to be eating healthier. But Sizzlean was not exactly what it claimed. It was a mix of pork and beef blended with artificial flavorings and fillers that barely qualified as real meat. Over time, new labeling laws and stricter regulations revealed that its marketing had been misleading. The product was pulled and Sizzlean quietly faded away. For those who remember it, the name still carries a strange nostalgia, half comfort, half caution. It was a glimpse into an era when we trusted packaging more than ingredients and believed that science could reinvent even bacon. Some memories sizzle out, others linger just long enough to remind us how good intentions can sometimes turn synthetic. Household bug bombs with DDT were once considered the ultimate solution for any insect problem, filling homes with a haze of chemicals that promised to wipe out everything from roaches to ants. Grandparents shook the can, placed it in the center of a room, and pressed the button before leaving the house for hours. When they returned, they believed they were stepping into a cleaner, safer home, free from pests that threatened their food or comfort. Back then, DDT was widely trusted, seen as a scientific miracle that protected crops, homes, and even public spaces. But DDT does not simply evaporate after use. It lingers on surfaces, carpets, clothing, and even inside the human body. Accumulating with every new exposure, scientists later discovered that DDT disrupted hormones, damaged wildlife, and posed serious health risks to people of all ages. When the evidence became undeniable, regulators banned DDT nationwide, and the household bug bombs that contained it vanished from store shelves. Many families were shocked to learn that something they used regularly carried dangers far beyond the bugs it killed. Looking back, these foggers represent a time when convenience outweighed caution, and chemicals were introduced into homes with little understanding of their long-term impact. Today, DDT stands as a symbol of environmental and health awareness born from painful discovery. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings, spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Canned meats preserved in nitrate salts looked like pure perfection. The color was bright pink, the flavor smoky, and the shelf life impressive. Housewives of the 1950s trusted them completely, serving slices of corned beef, deviled ham, and luncheon loaf without a second thought. It seemed like progress in a can, modern science keeping dinner safe and pretty. But what scientists would later discover about nitrates changed everything. When heated, These salts created nitrosamines, compounds linked to cancer and heart disease. That beautiful pink hue came at a dangerous cost. Even after the first warnings, it took years for consumers to believe that something so familiar could be deadly. People argued it was overblown, calling it just another scare. But soon, the facts became impossible to ignore. Those rosy slices were proof that sometimes color itself can lie. Doctors began warning families that the same food they fed their children could be silently poisoning them. By the time regulations caught up, generations had already grown up on nitrate-packed meat. It was a harsh lesson. Beauty in food can be deadly if you do not ask what makes it shine. What had once been the color of convenience turned into the warning color of caution. Asbestos pipe insulation wrapped around hot water pipes and heating ducts in basements across the nation, keeping heat from escaping and protecting families from burns. The fibrous material looked sturdy, and contractors installed it in nearly every home built or renovated during the 1970s. Parents walked past it on their way to the laundry. Children played near it during basement games, and nobody imagined the quiet danger hiding inside. As insulation aged, it deteriorated. Fibers broke loose and drifted into the air, settling on clothes, toys, and every surface nearby. People breathed them without feeling a thing, never suspecting that microscopic particles were embedding deep in lung tissue. Decades later, doctors diagnosed mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancers in people who could not understand how they were exposed. When investigators traced the source to basement insulation, the realization was devastating. Regulators banned asbestos in building materials and classified old pipe wrap as hazardous waste. Removing it now requires sealed barriers, respirators, and certified disposal. It is chilling to think that material meant to protect families carried a far deadlier threat. Aerosol hairsprays with chlorofluorocarbons were the finishing touch of every carefully crafted hairstyle in the 1970s, holding curls, waves, and elaborate updos firmly in place for hours. Women stood in bathrooms surrounded by clouds of fine mist, pressing down on nozzles until their hair felt stiff and perfectly sculpted. The hiss of the can became synonymous with getting ready for work, dates, and special occasions. People trusted these sprays completely because they worked, delivering hold that no liquid product could match. What nobody considered was where those propellant gases went after they left the can. Chlorofluorocarbons drifted upward through the atmosphere, slowly destroying the ozone layer that protects life on Earth from harmful radiation. Scientists eventually connected everyday beauty routines to a global environmental crisis. The bans came as part of an international effort to save the ozone layer, and the hairspray industry scrambled to reformulate. Those cans that once represented glamour now symbolize one of the most dramatic examples of how personal choices can have planetary consequences. Those shiny silver balls that once sparkled on Christmas cookies were more than decoration. They were tradition. Every family had them, tucked away in a jar beside colored sprinkles. They were called silver dragées, tiny metallic orbs that made cakes and wedding desserts shimmer like jewelry. In the glow of candlelight or under frosting, they looked almost too beautiful to eat. And, as it turned out, they were. The Food and Drug Administration banned them after discovering the metallic coating contained real silver, which is not considered edible. For years, bakers had sprinkled actual metal onto desserts without realizing the potential health risk. It was not toxic in small amounts, but the government could not take chances. By the early 2000s, the silver balls disappeared from American stores, relegated to "for decoration only" status. Still, people continued using them secretly, claiming no holiday cookie looked complete without that touch of sparkle. They became a quiet act of nostalgia, a bit of rebellion wrapped in frosting. Even now, older recipe books list them casually, as though nothing ever changed. There was magic in those metallic sweets, a reminder that sometimes beauty and danger can share the same shine, and that not everything meant for the eye should ever meet the tongue. High-voltage tube televisions without shielding were once the centerpiece of American living rooms, flickering with static and delivering the evening news in a warm glow that families gathered around. These sets were heavy, bulky, and full of complicated electronics that few people understood, but they brought entertainment into the home in a way nothing else could. Behind the scenes, though, those early televisions ran on dangerously high-voltage circuits that were not yet shielded the way modern electronics are. If a tube cracked or overheated, it could release radiation or send an electric shock through the casing. In some cases, internal components exploded, sending shards of glass inside the machine and sometimes outward toward anyone standing too close. Over time, safety standards improved and regulators required shielding that protected families from these hidden hazards. For many households, it is chilling to think that a beloved family television once carried risks nobody truly understood. Those sets tell a story of excitement, innovation, and the dangers that can hide inside even the most ordinary household items. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless, a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Butter-flavored margarine was a 1950s wonder, spreadable, cheap, and promoted as a heart-healthy alternative to butter. Housewives embraced it as the modern choice, the sign of progress in every kitchen. Its golden color and smooth texture promised indulgence without guilt. It was advertised in bright magazines beside smiling families and spotless kitchens, the perfect picture of American prosperity. Scientists and companies alike told the public it was the smarter fat, a scientific marvel that separated them from the old-fashioned ways of their parents. But science back then cared more about selling innovation than testing its safety. The secret behind its miracle formula was trans fats, the industrial oils hydrogenated to stay solid at room temperature. For decades, Americans slathered their toast and fried their eggs in it, believing they were doing their hearts a favor. Then the studies came, and the truth was hard to swallow. Trans fats were worse than the butter they replaced, clogging arteries and shortening lives. By the time it was banned, it had already shaped the diet of a generation. Butter-flavored margarine was more than a product. It was a lie sold with a smile. Chloroform-laced hair tonics were considered essential grooming products in the 1970s, sitting proudly on barbershop shelves and bathroom counters in homes across the nation. Men and women rubbed these tonics into their scalps, believing the cooling sensation meant the product was working, penetrating deep to strengthen roots and add shine. The smell was sharp, but not unpleasant, a chemical sweetness that people associated with cleanliness and care. Barbers applied it generously after every haircut, massaging it into scalps while customers relaxed in leather chairs. What people did not know was that chloroform was already recognized in medical circles as a dangerous substance capable of causing liver damage and even cancer with prolonged exposure. Every application released vapors that drifted into lungs and lingered in poorly ventilated rooms. By the time regulators connected the chemical to serious health consequences, countless people had already absorbed years of exposure. The bans arrived swiftly once the evidence became undeniable. Those bottles that once represented sophistication now stand as chilling examples of how dangerous substances once hid behind promises of beauty. Before energy drinks or sports beverages, there were jungle juice barrels, tiny plastic jugs filled with sweet fluorescent liquid. They were cheap everywhere and perfectly sized for a kid's hand. The foil tops peeled back with a satisfying pop, releasing a sugary scent that screamed childhood. You could buy a handful for the change in your pocket, clutching them like treasure all the way home. The colors, bright blue, cherry red, electric green, felt alive, like liquid candy glowing under sunlight. Kids would trade flavors at lunch tables, sipping victory through tiny straws. But those bright colors and low prices came at a cost. The dyes used in some batches were later found to violate safety standards, and the thin plastic barrels posed choking and contamination risks. The Food and Drug Administration cracked down, and the barrels disappeared from stores. Still, everyone who grew up in the 90s remembers seeing them stacked in pyramids at grocery entrances, 5 for $1, glowing like treasure. It was the drink of summer camps, playgrounds, and birthday parties. Today, the thought of drinking one might make adults cringe, but for a generation of kids, that syrupy taste still feels like home. Lead soldered canned foods were once a staple in every pantry, stacked in neat rows that promised long shelf life and simple meal prep during busy times. Grandparents relied on them for soups, vegetables, fruit, and even meats, believing that canned goods were one of the safest and most dependable food sources available. Families opened these cans daily, pouring their contents into pots without ever questioning how the can itself might affect the food. But lead does not stay put when it touches acidic ingredients like tomatoes or fruit juice. It slowly leaches into the food, turning a pantry staple into a silent source of contamination. Doctors eventually traced cases of lead poisoning back to these soldered cans, and regulators moved to eliminate lead from all food packaging. Suddenly, a trusted convenience became a symbol of hidden danger, a reminder that even the simplest products can carry risks no one expects today. Modern cans use safe materials, but the memory of those older designs still raises eyebrows. Those cafeteria meals shaped our childhoods, filling trays with foods we trusted completely. So what changed so drastically that the lunches we loved are now forbidden? Whole milk served in every carton was the unquestioned standard in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s, sitting in metal coolers beside the lunch line like tiny white soldiers waiting to be chosen. Kids grabbed them without thinking, peeling back the paper spout and drinking deeply while chatting with friends. Parents believed milk was simply good for growing bodies, and nobody questioned whether the fat content mattered. The creamy richness felt like part of the meal itself, something that washed down the heaviest cafeteria foods and left a satisfying film on the lips. Teachers encouraged it, nurses praised it, and lunch ladies handed out extras to anyone who asked. But when federal nutrition guidelines changed, whole milk became a target almost overnight. Studies linked full-fat dairy in childhood to weight concerns that worried health officials nationwide. Regulators stepped in and declared that only skim or 1% milk could be offered to students in public schools. The cartons stayed the same, but the contents grew thinner and far less satisfying to those who remembered how milk used to taste. Tinned fish packed in PCB-laced oil was once considered a healthy, protein-rich option for busy families. Tuna, sardines, and anchovies sat neatly in shiny metal tins, waiting to become quick lunches or midnight snacks. The oil inside kept them moist and flavorful, but it also carried a hidden poison. At the time, convenience was king, and no one thought to question what made those tins last so long on the shelf. Housewives trusted the packaging, the labels, and the smiling faces in the ads that promised ocean-fresh flavor. The irony was cruel. In trying to make food safer from spoilage, manufacturers had filled it with something far worse. Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, were used in industrial lubricants and electrical equipment. Somehow, they found their way into the oils used for food preservation, contaminating entire batches of canned fish. PCBs did not break down easily. They accumulated in the body, linked to cancers and reproductive harm. At the time, no one had a clue that a simple tuna sandwich could contain a chemical cousin of motor oil. When the scandal finally broke, it rocked the seafood industry and reshaped how food safety was monitored. Factories were overhauled, regulations tightened, and faith in clean eating took a heavy blow. The sea that had fed generations now carried a warning label of its own. PCB containing window caulking was applied around frames in homes throughout the 1970s because it stayed flexible, sealed tightly, and lasted far longer than older compounds. Contractors squeezed it into every gap, trusting it would keep drafts out and energy bills down. Homeowners appreciated how well it worked, never questioning what was inside. But polychlorinated biphenyls, the chemicals that gave caulking its durability, turned out to be profoundly dangerous. PCBs do not break down easily. They seep into surrounding materials, drift into the air as caulking ages, and accumulate in human tissue over time. Researchers linked long-term exposure to cancer, immune system damage, and developmental problems in children. When investigators tested older buildings, they found contamination spreading far beyond window frames into walls, flooring, and soil outside. Regulators classified PCB caulking as toxic waste, requiring professional removal teams in full protective gear. Families who felt proud of their sealed homes realized the material protecting them from cold was quietly poisoning them for years. Today, any renovation of an older building begins with testing for this invisible hazard. Formaldehyde-based nail hardeners were the secret weapon of every woman who dreamed of long, strong, perfectly polished nails in the 1970s. These little bottles promised to transform soft, brittle nails into gleaming shields capable of withstanding anything daily life could throw at them. Women painted them on faithfully, layer after layer, watching their nails grow longer and harder with each application. The smell was sharp and chemical, but people assumed that was simply the scent of something powerful doing its job. Manicurists used these products in salons, and mothers passed them along to daughters as essential beauty tools. What nobody understood was that formaldehyde fumes did not stay confined to the nail surface. They drifted into the air, absorbed into lungs, and irritated skin with every exposure. Some women developed allergic reactions so severe their nails separated from their nail beds entirely. When researchers confirmed formaldehyde as a known carcinogen, the bans followed quickly. Those little bottles that once seemed like magic became symbols of an era that trusted chemicals far more than it should have. Yoo-hoo was a drink built on nostalgia long before nostalgia became a trend. Its chocolatey flavor was a childhood staple, the kind of sweet, slightly watery treat that made you feel like everything was simpler back then. But the early formula carried a secret: sodium benzoate levels that could become unsafe under heat or improper storage. When the truth came out, it shocked people who had grown up with that yellow bottle as part of their lives. Yoo-hoo wasn't just a drink, it was a summer memory, a lunchbox companion, a reward after mowing the lawn. To learn it could spoil so easily felt like finding out your childhood friend had a dark side. In hot delivery trucks and sunlit store displays, the preservative sometimes reacted to spoil the drink faster than expected. The company faced growing scrutiny, and regulators demanded changes. By the time Yoo-hoo was reformulated, the charm of its golden age had faded a little. Still, for many who grew up in the 50s through the 80s, that yellow bottle remains a symbol of innocence, when a chilled chocolate drink on a summer afternoon could make the whole world feel right again. Flammable aluminum Christmas trees were once a dazzling holiday trend. Shimmering like something from the future and reflecting the glow of colorful lights, grandparents loved how bright and modern they looked, turning living rooms into sparkling winter displays. But underneath the beauty was a danger no one fully understood at the time. These trees were often paired with rotating color wheels and hot electric bulbs, all placed dangerously close to thin metallic branches. If a wire sparked or a bulb overheated, the aluminum surface could catch fire in an instant. Whole trees went up quickly, giving families little time to react as decorations turned into flames. Many people only learned the risk after tragic holiday accidents led to national warnings. Regulators later banned the most dangerous models and required strict fire safety standards for anything with metal components. Today, these trees serve as a reminder that even the most cheerful traditions can hide real hazards when safety takes a backseat to style. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar. the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. If any of these forgotten baby products stirred a memory or a shiver, share your story in the comments. Tap like to help others discover the truth, and subscribe so you never miss the hidden history waiting in your own home.